Mike Radich here, and I'm now joined on the phone by MMA veteran Joey Villasenor. Joey, how are you?
I'm doing great, sir. How about yourself, man?
I'm doing good. Thanks for asking. Joey, the name of the game is really random. That's where I ask you a random question and you give me the real answer. Some of these questions are custom made just for you, and some of these questions are generic ones that I ask all the people I interview. So, here's the first question. Superpower you'd love to have?
Ooh, let me see here. Probably, I think, the ability to fly.
Favorite movie?
My favorite movie, it's written and directed by Darren Aronofsky, and it is The Fountain. The Fountain.
Favorite color?
Black.
Favorite guilty pleasure?
Ice cream, man. I love ice cream.
Joey, you haven't fought since June of 2012. Are you officially retired? Because I haven't seen any formal statement from you. Are you officially retired?
Yes, sir, man. I walked away from the sport quietly, no big announcement. Just, walked away, started running one of Greg Jackson's schools, and retired kind of without making a big hoopla about it.
Running one of Greg Jackson's schools and coaching, is that all you do, or do you have a side business or something else you're involved in? I went back to school. I went and got my EMT license. I'm looking into the fire department, becoming a fireman. I also was looking into becoming a police officer as well. But right now, currently, I am instructing full-time at Jackson's Winks MMA. I run our amateur program, and I also run pads and coaching for amateurs and for pros and veterans. Because I was going to say, I've seen you cornering amateur guys and young pros, the up-and-coming guys at the gym. Now, is that the plan for you going forward? Is that why they hired you, is to run, because you've been a part of Jackson's forever, you're one of the original guys, but is that the plan for you? Are you the guy who's going to build these guys from the ground up, or is this something, as you get more and more experience as a coach, they're going to move you up to more the bigger name guys? What exactly is the plan for you coaching-wise?
Yeah, well, they've been grooming me for a while. Greg Jackson personally has been grooming me for a while to help relieve some of his duties. He's traveling pretty much weekly. Every weekend, it's taken a toll on him physically and mentally, and then of course, family time. So they've been grooming me for a while to kind of share the duties with Greg. I have an MMA mind, whereas Coach Winklejohn is more on the striking side. I'm kind of like Greg Jackson, really versed in the MMA realm of things. Coach Winklejohn understands a tremendous amount of the ground and wrestling as well, but Greg's been grooming me for a while to take over his role and or share the duties. So you're going to see me a little bit more frequently coming up, bigger fights, more marketable fights, just because Greg's gonna, the team's growing, and it's hard for Greg to be everywhere at one time. So I have a lot of pull in the gym. A lot of guys respect me, of course, having a 14/15-year pro career. I can kind of, understand all avenues of the sport, and then on top of that, of course, coaching now, too.
Do you work only with fighters and guys who are trying to make a career out of this, or do you work with the average Joe?
Both. When I work with fighters and up-and-comers, I put in a lot of pad time, grappling time with these young guys, and I also work with the average Joe. I used to be an average Joe myself, and everybody's going to start somewhere, and I believe that martial arts really helps build confidence in people. So I coach everything from the soccer mom
to grandma, to grandpa, to children. I'm very open to all avenues of people. And sometimes I'm coach. I also teach self-defense. Self-defense as far as street self-defense, firearm self-defense. I'm not just a fighter, I'm a well-rounded defensive tactics instructor too. Mm-hmm. I take great pride in that. Greg Jackson's a huge into defensive tactics as well. He teaches SWAT team, SEAL teams. He's got a huge array of people that he teaches as well.
I know you said that Greg Jackson was grooming you to be a coach, but did you always see yourself being a coach? You know, when your career was starting to wind down, did you always think you were going to be a coach, or was it something that you just kind of fell into?
Yes, I've always participated in coaching with Greg. When I was fighting and traveling a lot, I coached a lot of fights too. I love the coaching aspect of fighting. It's a hard transition and fighters find this out. To be able to teach, you can be a fighter, but it's really hard to be an instructor. You have to really believe in what you're teaching, and you have to be able to answer all questions. So, I've had a great mentor in Greg Jackson, but I've been coaching as long as I've been fighting too. It's just one of those things that I've transitioned into very easily. Coaching and being able to communicate with people is a strong point of mine. You can take some great athletes, but then you sit them down and try to have them explain techniques or movements, and it's really hard and difficult for some of them to do. I believe now, after looking back at my career, I'm a better. I feel like I'm a better coach than I was a fighter, and the reason why I say that is because of all the experiences fighting martial arts. There's never an end point. You keep learning. You never stop learning. And all the experiences that I've been through personally fighting, and then coaching, and then of course on the mats daily, you really become to understand the sport on a greater level. So with all the experience I have, 25 years in mixed martial arts, of course I'm going to feel like I'm better at coaching than I was a fighter, just because of the experience that I've gained doing so.
Your last fight was June 2nd, 2012. You went out perfectly. You went out with a win. You fought in the main event of a Jackson's MMA series card, and you fought in Albuquerque. So you went out perfectly, but did you know that was going to be your last fight?
No, I didn't. I felt like the window was closing on me. Injuries, physical fatigue. I got diagnosed with low testosterone. I wasn't one of those fighters lucky enough to have made so much money to where or be sponsored to have doctors that were managing my hormone levels. I was never placed on TRT. It was one of those things where, and that's one thing about fighting. When you're a top-tier fighter, when you're recognizable, or when you're a really established fighter and you have a lot of people that want to support you money-wise, you can get that kind of treatment where you can get blood work every week, or you can have doctors manage you. I wasn't in that kind of situation. I just couldn't afford a TRT. And then, of course, the rules and guidelines changed across the board for TRT when it came to the UFC. And I had a long, career, and it was just time, and I didn't know it was going to be my last fight. I just never fought again. I took over one of Greg's schools, and I was happy there. Happy there. I'm 41 now. Still in great shape. I felt like it took a couple of years for me to physically recover from all the abuse of training extensively like I did. So even up to this day, I still deal with a lot of aches and pains and the sport can be very brutal, and being one of those first-gen MMA fighters where I saw a whole career of 15 years, the studies and on knockouts and injury, and are just now starting to shine light on those studies and those things. The sport was still very brand new. It's come such a long way, and it's very exciting to see. I feel like I was one of those fighters who will look back on the sport just like a lot of the NFL guys did back in the day, and they had jobs and played football. Now you're starting to see greater respect and appreciation for the sport, and I was very glad and blessed to be a part of it. I just missed the boat when it came to big money, kind of the respect that it gets from the public now. So it's come a long way, and I'm very pleased to see that, especially for the younger generation of guys. This sport can be very brutal. NFL is known for being one of the toughest sports in all pro sports, rightfully so. But there's an off season. With MMA, there's no off season. You're called throughout the calendar year. So there's no off season for MMA fighters, and it can be very brutal. It's a physically enduring sport.
Have you ever got the itch to fight again? And obviously you haven't fought since 2012, so obviously there's something that keeps you away. If you have got the itch to fight again, what keeps you away?
Of course I've gotten the itch. Once a competitor, you'll always be a competitor. I'm able to scratch that need whenever I need to. I throw it on the gloves and sparring with the guys, doing some rounds with the guys. I can still hold my own, and I actually believe on a technical level I'm a lot better than I was when I left. But I do understand that injury can set me back. Coaching and holding pads is a huge it's a huge way in how I make my living. So if I was to sustain an injury that you can sustain in training, there goes my income. So I'm very smart about training. I don't put it on the line all the time like I used to. I am 41. I still love competing. I always get the itch, but I'm very satisfied with my students and how they perform. I take great pride in it, and great pride in seeing my teammates excel, and now I live vicariously through them, so I'm still involved in the sport. I love it tremendously. I'm still a big part of our team, and I always will be. Looking for a fire department job, one of the reasons why it's so appealing to me is there's another source of steady income. There's retirement, and I would be on 2 days straight and then have 4 days off, and in those 4 days off I would be able to still contribute to the team. So everything is still based around contributing to our team, whether I'm coaching full-time or share that duty with another job. I'm still going to be a big part of the team.
Let's go back to the beginning, because when you started fighting, MMA wasn't even MMA. It was No Holds Barred, or NHB. That's what they were calling it at the time. And there was no money. There was no exposure. A lot of these shows that you fought on in the early days weren't on TV. There was none of the stuff that we're accustomed to now. So why MMA? Why did you decide to pursue a career in this sport at a time where there was really nothing in it for the guys except glory of fighting?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's the competitive nature in me. Honestly, when I watched, I think it was UFC 2, UFC 3, that took place in Colorado. That was the first time I was ever exposed to MMA. I was always an athlete growing up: football, baseball, whatever sport I decided to do. I fared pretty well in it. I started teaching martial arts because of UFC 3. I think it was in Denver, Colorado. I saw Pat Smith just murder this guy in the mount, and I realized these martial artists that were really good at their arts, how brutal that sport can be. And literally, I got scared into self-defense. I never wanted to be that guy who got dominated on the ground or didn't know what to do on the ground. I never wanted to be that person who got just handled and beat on. You know, it was a scary thing that first UFC I watched was bare knuckles, and it scared me. So I started taking self-defense, jiu-jitsu, and all that stuff because I never wanted to be a victim to that kind of outcome. So I took it for self-defense purposes. And as I got better at it, you know, I started submitting and outperforming guys that have been doing it for years pretty quickly. And then after a period of time, the reason why I took fighting was because I wanted to face my fears. I wanted to see if it was something that I can, all the skills that I was learning, I wanted to see if it would really transition over into a real-life scenario. So that was why I started fighting. I started fighting because I was learning a skill set, and I wanted to see how applicable it was to a real-life situation. So that's why I started fighting, and I loved it. I loved that it was a pure sport. I loved that it was a one-on-one basis. You had a team and coaches that helped you out, but at the end of the day, you were in there by yourself, and you really have to manage stress. There's nothing like it. I mean, you feel like a guy's trying to quote unquote murder you, and you're trying to be patient and do the right things under all that kind of stress. So I really loved the mental side of it too. And then before you knew it, won 15 straight, became a champ in KOTC, and started getting some good offers. And I made a living off of fighting, and it all started from fear, and then it transitioned into a really deep love for the game. What I really love about MMA is handling stress, the reality, and that's what I totally love and admire about fighters. Is they are tough, to get to begin with, but having to deal with stress, and especially now they get publicity stress. Now they get stress through media and through fans and social media. There's so much stress to endure, and then go out there and perform. It's exceptional. I mean, it's incredible. That's why you have NFL, baseball, hockey. You have all these pro athletes from around the world really loving the sport and what we do, and really respect it because they understand exactly what we put on the line.
You're one of the original guys at Jackson, along with guys like Diego Sanchez and Keith Jardine. How did you find Jackson's, and also, what were the early days like there?
Me and my buddy Floyd Sword were fighting out of Farmington, New Mexico. That was me and him started Team Four Corners. We're in Farmington, New Mexico. We were some of the first pro fighters out of the state of New Mexico, and we heard of this other gym called Jackson's Martial Arts. So we inquired them. We went down to Albuquerque, heard that they were martial artists themselves, MMA guys, and they were just just starting out their careers. I think Keith was 2-0 or 1-0. Diego was 3-0 at the time. We were all beginner MMA fighters. They had exceptional groundwork. I've never seen anything like it. Me and Floyd were well versed in striking, so they kind of scratched each other's backs. Farmington, New Mexico is about 2.5 hours, 3 hours away from Albuquerque. So we would travel down on weekends, and sometimes they would travel up on weekends. So we started that way. And then eventually I ended up moving to Albuquerque because that's what I needed to do to pursue a career and get serious. But the early days at Jackson's was... it was a small gym. It was super small. Greg, I think, was just it was so small, and he was just marketing his name, and it was easy, Jackson's, and when I moved down, he had a friend named Mike Winklejohn, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays we would go to his school, a kickboxing school, and spar with his kickboxers and boxers. And then eventually they merged and became Jackson's Wink. But when I first started out, man, Coach Winklejohn had his own facility, and it was a striking facility, and kickboxing world champs, boxing world champs. And then there was Greg Jackson's, one of the best grappling schools in the nation. And then they merged, and that's how we became Jackson's Wink.
Your career predates a lot of the MMA websites that are out there now, so your professional record, the one that they have listed for you, is 29-10. Is that record accurate?
Yes, yeah, that's very accurate. That's accurate. I mean, that's every MMA fight I was in. When I first started fighting, I believe 98, 99, there was no opportunity for amateur MMA. The sport was so new.
Right.
You just started out a pro,
Right.
When I first started out fighting, I don't think even middleweight was established. I used to fight at light heavyweight, which was from 195 to 170,
Yeah.
So the sport was super new. There was a couple of fights in there throughout my career that I felt I won, but wasn't given credit for, and that stuff happens, I truly believe that my record should be 32-8, which is a great record. Not to take away from the guys that I thought they were very tough fights. I just felt like I had won a couple of those fights that I felt were taken from me. But that's MMA and that's sports. You go to other people's hometowns or we've all seen them. We've all seen robberies before. And somebody might feel that way about me. They might feel like they wanted to fight against me, But in all actuality, with me being completely honest and unbiased, 29-10 is what it stands at. I would have went 31-8 if two of those 10 losses were turned the other way. But they weren't, and that's just the way things fall, So I've had some students, amateurs and or pros, have fights taken for them to go the other way. And that's just sports for you. When you leave it up to other people, those things happen, But that's an accurate number, sir.
Did you ever fight bare fist, no gloves, and did you ever wear any shoes in there fighting in the early days?
No, back there was a couple of times where you could wear. I wore wrestling shoes one time. I came off a fractured leg, spinal fracture, and had surgery. And 6 months later, I was back at it. And I did wear wrestling shoes for traction. Wrestling shoes was something that was acceptable back then, which is crazy when you think about it now. I mean, the sport was a fledgling sport and still evolving. And I'm so blessed to have experienced all the things that I went through and all the things that I got to see and all the places I got to go to. And I'm very blessed to be a part of that history of MMA. Now, I mean, there's still even growth in it now, rules changing. We just now got into New York, so the sport keeps evolving. I do believe that it's going to be the biggest combative sport ever created. I think we're going to see coliseums. We're going to see some super fights. We're going to see coliseums sold out. I think that it's on the cusp of becoming one of the best sports and most exciting sports in the world. However, there are almost too many MMA fights happening. There is a great deal of the sport is somewhat watered down. Back in the day when you were fighting on a main card, when there was one event every 3 months, that was such an honor. Now there's 3 to 4 MMA bouts, huge cards going on weekly. So back in the day, I mean, to be on a
a pay-per-view card or a Showtime card, CBS card, and to be on those cards every time you fought was awesome. Now the sport is. I see guys in the UFC at 4-0 and 5-0, and that's it's shocking to me. It's there needs to be a little bit more. It's hard. So many fighters now, it's hard to keep track. Back in the day, it was an honor to be one of a main card of once every 2 to 3 months. Nowadays, like I said, that the sport is there's a plethora of events going on, and so many fighters. There's some great fighters out there that we've never even heard of. Let's say, for instance, my teammate Landon Bonata. He was quietly fighting on these small circuits at 8-0, and now when he stepped in on 2 weeks' notice and faced
Tony Ferguson.
Yes, he threw him right on the map, and then his last fight, he got that exceptional KO.
Right.
Landon's a superstar. We have a great deal of guys like that on the team that nobody's even heard of. So we take great pride in that. There's some great athletes out there that nobody's even heard of. It all comes down to exposure. But man, what an honor it was back in the day, and the sport's evolved tremendously, but at the same time, I feel like it's a little watered down too.
When you started fighting, it was the Wild Wild West. There was a lot of crazy stuff going on. What's the craziest thing you saw in the early days?
Oh man, let me see here. I guess one of the craziest things was when I fought in Pride. When I fought in Pride, it was one of the most recognizable events on the planet. And when I was getting organized to go there, I mean, a lot of people believe that it was ran by Yakuza,
right. Right.
And Pride president ended up, quote unquote, committing suicide at one time or whatever. And when I fought in Pride, I thought that things would be a little bit more on a professional level, but it was so I was like, okay, how do I get this working visa? To go to Japan and fight on one of your. Oh, don't worry about it. Just tell them you're coming down here for martial arts exhibition or for training. Okay, and then when they paid us under the table. So there was no tax papers, no paper trail, and a lot of, and that's surprising for as huge as they were. It was very surprising to me. That's why I take such a. That's why the UFC. They have their pros and their cons. They're monster business, and they've chomped up a great deal of events and purchased them and vice versa. But they run a clean ship. They're really professional. Everything's scheduled and timed, and the paper trail is. I mean, they exceptionally understand the business side of the sport, and I'm glad to see them do it, and to see a lot of these other organizations follow suit. Being organized is super important for a fighter. Weigh-ins being on time, vice versa. All those things. You want those things to be timed out so you can schedule out your day appropriately. So to not have to worry about that or think about, how am I going to get to the sauna? How am I going to, get here and there to work for an organization that's got their stuff together, that really helps out tremendously the fighter.
You still hold the record for most consecutive title defenses in King of the Cage with 7. You're a part of history for that promotion, but I'm curious, when you signed with Pride, you had to vacate the King of the Cage title, so do you still have that belt?
Yeah, I have a couple of them actually. I gave one to my mom. I have one here at home with me. It's in my garage somewhere. I don't. My house isn't what you would imagine a fighter's house to look like. I have hardly any fighting memorabilia. I'm just an everyday Joe. Most of my clippings and all that, but you go to my mom's house and she takes tremendous pride in my fighting, and she has a lot of, my belt up, and pictures and clippings, and she can just show you everything. But it was really hard for me as a fighter back in those times to save everything, to save every magazine. Everything is so social media now, and now everything can be saved on the computer. Back in the day, you had to save your booklets, you had to save this and that. So I didn't take much time saving things. I was more preparing for the next fight, So it was an honor, like I said, to be a part of history and to see how times have changed.
So all your fight memorabilia is with your mom, like all your gloves, all your shorts, all your walkout shirts, all that stuff. Because you had all this nice stuff. I always remember that about you. You had all these great shorts, and you always had these big sponsors, Tap Out, Fairtex, all these great brands that I always loved, especially back then. So it's all with your mom?
Well,
do you have anything?
Just the clippings and the new stuff and some fighting pictures, but I have a lot of stuff still. I gave out a lot of stuff to students that weren't fortunate enough to have shorts or to have T-shirts to train in. New Mexico is the second most poverty state in the United States, and some students are just, they're putting every cent they have into just training. So I've handed out a lot of equipment to a lot of students that needed help with such, and I have a couple of pairs of gloves and some shorts that I retired, and they're in my garage in storage. But I've never been that guy to boast about my career, to be, I don't need things around my house for me to be like, wow, yeah, I remember that day, or man, I'm so honored for, I have a mind and a heart that is so full of those moments that they're very personal. I guess I don't need to share and express those moments with everybody. I guess they are so personal to me that I keep them close to my heart with socks. And I don't have a case with gloves and a pair of fat shorts, and I just never really cared about that kind of stuff. I think when I get older, as I'm getting older, and I see a lot of fighters doing these things, I'm like, wow, that's nice. And maybe I should have thought about that stuff, but I was so busy as a fighter, I never had time to slow down. And like I said, nowadays there's such a greater respect for fighters and the times of MMA that you have people putting in time and effort to help fighters do those things. But back in the day, it was so blue collar. I didn't have time to really think about that stuff. I just was focused on the next fight or task at hand.
What do you remember about your reign as King of the Cage middleweight champion?
I fought some tough, worthy opponents. I really enjoyed and appreciated being King of the Cage champ. They gave me my start. Again, me, Diego, Keith, Jardine, we all started through King of the Cage, and one thing that I do remember is eventually they had to just give us title shots, man. We were just some kids from New Mexico. Some of them didn't even know where New Mexico was. And they were giving us some worthy opponents that they thought we were going to lose to, but we just kept winning. And we put New Mexico on the map, and now everybody recognizes New Mexico as the hub of MMA, and to be a part of that is tremendous, But back in the day, we weren't given any give-me fights. We were not supposed to win. But eventually they just couldn't avoid us. Tap Out really believed in us. Mask and the guys at Tap Out, they got Diego and Keith on the Ultimate Fighter, and then we met Rashad and Nate Marquardt, and then our Aussie guys, and then George came, and then it grew from there. And then people started realizing just how great of a coach Greg Jackson is, and how great of a coach Mike Winklejohn are, and then of course the toughness and the desire to the fighters, and now we're recognized as an MMA city, the MMA city, and it's a great, tremendous honor to be a part of it, So what I remember about King of the Cage was how they just couldn't get rid of us. They couldn't stop us. We just kept winning, and there wasn't anything they could do about it. And eventually they just, succumbed to it, and then we became the marketable guys.
The fight before you became the champion, you knocked out Hank the Vice Weiss in 5 seconds.
Yeah.
What a knockout that was. Now, I'll never know what it's like to get a knockout in 5 seconds because I'm not a fighter. So how did that knockout feel? Did that feel like it was shorter than 5 seconds? Did it feel like 1 or 2 seconds, or did it feel like it was longer? And when the announcer announced that it was only in 5 seconds, you're like, whoa, I thought it was a lot longer than that. How does a knockout that ends that quickly, how does that feel? Longer or shorter?
It was tremendous, of course. I felt really bad for my opponent. Of course, I went out there, and I was known for my left hook, sometimes a super wide left hook, but that is one thing that a lot of my training partners and teammates and the guys I fought would say is that I generated a tremendous amount of power for my size, and when I landed that punch, actually the punch went, it was a hook. I went to throw a hook cross, and when I hit him with the hook, he started falling down, and I went to throw the cross, and it was over his head because those are already on the way down.
Right.
I actually didn't even feel the connection. I thought I missed the punch, but that's how clean I hit him on the chin. I just felt like I missed, and I celebrated for a minute, and then after a few minutes, when he didn't get up, I was very scared. I thought, holy cow, what if I really hurt this guy really bad? So my attention went to him and his safety, and then he finally came to, and he suffered a concussion, and he didn't remember the whole week. He didn't remember the fight. It was a scary moment, but at the end of the day, he was okay, and I was thankful for it. But man, I didn't even realize that I landed that punch, and it seemed a lot longer when you're in there. But it was quick, man. It was very quick. It was the initial engagement.
Every time you tried to make history, things never went well for you. You tried to become the first ever Elite XC middleweight champion, and you lost that fight to Marilla Ninjahua. And then you had the first fight in the history of Pride in the United States against Robbie Lawler. Now, what was the tougher loss? Was it the loss against Hua, a fight where at the beginning you were doing really well, and as the fight went on, things started to go south for you, or the Robbie Lawler fight, a fight where it was pretty much over before it even started? What was the tougher loss?
That's the one. In both fights, I was favored to win. I really felt like I was going to win, and that's sports for you. How different would my life have been if I would have won both of those fights? Two fights that I was capable of winning and was favored to win, So with Hua, with Ninja, within that month, we suffered. Rashad lost, Keith lost, I lost, Nate lost. We had a string of bad losses there. We believe it was from overtraining. We were just trial and error guys, man. And we had a new strength and conditioning coach, wrestling coach, and we all suffered the same type of loss. We faded midway through the fight. And I was one to never believe in overtraining, but it was a lesson that the whole team had to deal with, And with the Hua fight, that was one of the things that we learned as a group as core, and of course made us a lot better in understanding that the physicality of the sport is very important. But Robbie Lawler one is the one that hurts the most. I respect Robbie, and then of course he went on to do some tremendous things in the sport. I respect Robbie. He was the first power southpaw that I was facing, and I made a right-hander's mistake. I reacted. What I now teach my students and call them default. Under stress, what do you default to? Dan Henderson, when he fought Vitor, Vitor twice, he also defaulted twice against a power southpaw that you're not supposed to do, and that's lean into a southpaw's power. Well, that's what I did with Robbie. That was a default. That was the first time I was facing a power southpaw. So when I teach my students, I teach them not only through my experiences, but the experience of other fights and fighters as well. But the thing with Robbie was I got clipped by a head kick. I don't remember being in there. I just remember a flying knee and him really trying to finish the fight. He did what he needed to do, and I never got to throw a punch. So that was the most upsetting thing about it was we traded, we exchanged. It was a fight. It was a fight that I was winning, but there was some exchanges there. With Robbie Lawler, I never got to throw a punch, so that really ate me alive, But at the end of the day, lessons learned. That's sports for you, I could have been, I could have really had history on my side, and who knows where my life would have propelled me if I win those two fights. But it just wasn't meant to be. It just wasn't meant to be, and I accept it and take it for what it was. But that's MMA for you. You can be so close, yet so far away, and I take those experiences with me, and I was really happy to see what Robbie went on to do. He's a veteran himself, and I was always cheering for him. I know he respected me. We've talked a few times afterwards, ran into each other, and there's a camaraderie there with your opponents. There's that respect and that appreciation, and I was very happy to see his successful story and his return and his triumphant return, and that was one for the veterans, man. He was an old schooler, and I was very, very happy to see him do so well.
Does it still bother you that Elite XC, a Night of Champions, never happened? Because there you are, you're able to kill two birds with one stone. You're able to avenge a loss against Robbie Lawler, and you're able to get another shot at the Elite XC middleweight belt. But then the entire Elite XC went out of business, and then more bad things happened to you because they inherited, or Strikeforce inherited your contract and led you to a long layoff. So does that still bother you, that whole situation?
Yeah, man, that was one of the worst times throughout my career. I was 2 weeks away from a main event with Robbie Lawler in Reno, Nevada. I was happy, man. I was excited. I felt like I had learned. I ended up fighting a southpaw again and learning and beating that southpaw and Ricky Fukuda. And I felt really ready for power southpaw. I felt like I fixed those defaults. I was ready for that fight. I was excited for that fight. As a fighter, when you lose a fight, you don't run from them. You want to face that, Here I was given a chance to face Robbie Lawler again. and you talk about, I felt ready. I felt like my skill set had advanced. I felt like I was ready for a power southpaw. I felt really confident. And then 2 weeks before the event happened, Kimbo Slice lost, and the event crumbled. And then there I was on the shelf for over a year, for about a year. And you don't realize as a fighter when you sign contracts that you become an asset and that these things can happen. They didn't allow me to fight because I was an asset to a company. And when you're signing all these contracts, you don't realize how important your name is on that dotted line to that 30-page contract. You don't realize all the small details that go into those contracts. So I learned a very tough lesson, and I was put on the shelf. So not only did I not get the fight with Robbie, we were put on the shelf for over a year, you know, and we all experienced that, and it was a bad time for MMA and for us as fighters. And then Strikeforce went on to purchase our contracts, and then eventually Strikeforce sold out to the UFC, and that's where all the guys, you know, all the Strikeforce guys got some really big respect as they finally started fighting in the big show and started winning, and you know, they became a force, you know, and I was a part of that crew, you know. Things just didn't pan out for me, and you know, I can dwell on it or I can grow from it, and you know, I'm not sour about it now, you know. In that time, it was one of those things that it really hurt, man. It really hurt me on an emotional level, and then of course on a working level. To not get any money or income for a whole year was very hard. But again, I lived through all that. I experienced it, and now I can help and share those kind of times with my students.
You had a lot of tough losses during your career. Obviously, the Lawler fight, the Hua fight, the Wallhead fight. You had a fight back in 2001 against Jermaine Andre that you got injured in, so the fight didn't even really happen. It was like only 20 seconds long, so that was a tough one. Then you had the Chris Camozzi loss, which originally ended in a draw, but what's weird about that one is because you were in your hometown and got robbed. Usually you go to someone else's hometown and get robbed, but it happened to you in your own hometown, and originally it was a draw, and so we thought, all right, maybe, you know, they'll appeal this and maybe Joey Villasenor will get a win. They ended up doing way worse to you because they ended up giving him a win, and everyone thought that you were robbed. So you had a lot of tough losses, but what would you consider your toughest loss?
I think you know, all of them have their sting to them, but the Jermaine Andre one is where I sustained a spiral fracture and broke my leg in that fight. And it happened right out of the gate, first 20 seconds in. I think the toughest loss that I ever endured was the Robbie Lawler one. And the reason being is, as a fighter, you want to have a few exchanges. Wallhead, again, favored in that fight. And I threw an overhand that got caught in his shoulder, and he just short little punch, and he caught me clean on the chin. It was the first time that I ever got knocked out cold in any of my fights, and I take great pride in you know, in that. But I got knocked out cold in that fight, and the losses that I sustained, you know, when I was the favorite, and those sting, you know, those sting, because I know what I was capable of. I know that history was so close and within my grasp, but it just quite didn't happen for me, you know, and there's going to be a lot of exceptional fighters that are going to miss the boat just that way. But I did have a career. I had a great career out of it. I've got a lot of experiences. And at the end of the day, you have to realize that it's just a sport. My mom's still going to love me. My girlfriend loves me, you know, like my team. The people who love you will still love you. And at the end of the day, it's a sport. You know, it's a sport that you have passion and love for. But you shouldn't put everything into it, because sports, and especially MMA, is so unpredictable, you know? So I was very blessed and happy to have had all those experiences, and you talking about all this history, man, it makes me really think back to, wow, look at all those things that I experienced as a fighter. Not only was there physical growth, but emotional and self-growth there too. MMA helped really turn me into a man, you know. I remember
remember the first time I sat down in front of a whole media room full of media, and that was for Pride. I had never, ever done media before. Mm-hmm. Even when I was King of the Cage champ, it was just an interview here or there on the phone. But there I was in Pride, and I got put in a podium in front of a room full of Japanese media. Holy hell, you talk about nerves, man. I was so nervous for the freaking media journalism aspect that I ever was for the fight. So man, I got to experience some great things, and you bringing up all this stuff really makes me happy in knowing how lucky I was with all the things that I experienced.
You kind of touched on it just now, and I wanted to ask you about it a little bit later, but since you brought it up now, what was it like fighting in Pride? Because here you were fighting on these small shows, and then you go from those small shows. I mean, King of the Cage was a big show at the time. It's kind of like, I guess, the equivalent to RFA now. Like, it was, King of the Cage was the springboard to Pride. A lot of those guys were fighting King of the Cage and then ended up getting contracts with Pride, but back then, you were fighting in these smaller venues, and then you go to Pride, and at that time, Pride was the biggest show for MMA, period. They were bigger than the UFC at that time, and your debut against Ryo Chonin was in the Pride 183-pound welterweight Grand Prix, so you had a big stage, a big platform, and fighting, in a big tournament. So what was that like for you, going from smaller shows, smaller venues, to the big time?
The biggest change was obviously going to Japan and fighting in Japan. Mm-hmm. I had fought there previously in the deep, but that's exactly why I chose the King of the Cage route. I was rumored about going on the Ultimate Fighter with Diego on season 1, but I chose an alternative route. I wanted to fight in Pride. The UFC. Ultimate Fighter 1 became historic in itself, but I wanted to fight in Pride. And the biggest difference was, of course, like I just shared with you, was that media. Holy cow, the media. And then the second biggest thing that stuck out the most was I fought in front of, I believe it was 52,000 people, somewhere around that in the Satsuma Arena. And it was so quiet. I could hear my corner and the golfer applauding whenever they saw something exceptional. And it wasn't like fighting in front of a bunch of drunk Americans. It was usually you hear the boos and the fuck him up and the beat his ass and the crazy chatter that comes from American crowds. Well, in Japan, it was a totally different atmosphere. And the respect for martial arts that they had was exceptional. And I remember just thinking I was fighting in a gymnasium because it was so quiet. It was surreal, but at the same time, it was one of the best feelings I've ever had. I remember that I can soccer kick a guy, and at the end of the fight, I ended up breaking through Ryle's guard, standing up, and I remember landing a stomp on him, and I remember drilling that stomp throughout training because you can stomp, you can knee to the head, you can soccer kick them. So I was drilling all these Pride allowed rules, and then it came to fruition, and towards the end of the fight, I got to stomp on Ryo Chonin, and to be able to just free fight like that was amazing, and to get there. One of the things I share with my students is it's not about getting there. It's not about getting to the UFC. It's about getting there and staying there. Too many fighters make getting there the goal, when that's not the goal at all. The goal is getting there and staying there. Now, that's a true professional.
You fought for Pride, Strikeforce, Elite XC, King of the Cage, Deep, Shark Fights, Bama, and WFA. You fought for a lot of different promotions. What would you say was your favorite promotion to fight for?
I would have to say my favorite was Elite XC, because that's what put me on the map. I remember the first Elite XC, I got to fight David Loazo, who was just coming off of a championship loss to Franklin, and that guy, and he was ranked, I think, in the top 3 at the time, or he just lost to Franklin. He was the
number one contender, just lost to the champ. And I got to fight him, and I dominated that fight, and I got to showcase who I was. It was, Gina Carano, myself, one of my former teammates, Julie Kedzie. Women's MMA had just started with Gina Carano, and Julie Kedzie in their historic fight. Kimbo Slice, and then being on network television. That was the first time when I fought Phil Baroni that another historical moment was the first time that MMA was broadcast on national television. CBS. Now it's on Fox. But that was the first time it was ever broadcast on national television. And I fought Phil Baroni on CBS, and I believe at the time it was the second most viewed MMA fight in history. So they really put me on the map, and they really helped propel my career for me to be able to fight in these other avenues and other places. So sometimes all you need as a fighter is to be exposed. To be exposed to me, and I was very blessed and thankful for that.
You gave us so many great knockouts during your career. The Hank Weiss knockout is a great one. The Brendan Seguin knockout, I thought you killed him. That was an amazing one. The Ryan Jensen knockout was amazing. The Phil Baroni knockout was brutal. I remember you just repeatedly hitting him in the face, and he was completely out of it. He couldn't move anywhere as he was trying to pull himself up by the cage. He was grabbing the fence to try to pull himself up. That was a beautiful knockout. And then you also had a knockout earlier in your career against a guy by the name of Eddie Rowland.
Yeah.
Eddie Rowland. That was a brutal knockout. His head exploded. You hit him with a knee on the ground because back then it was legal, and you hit him with a knee on the ground, and his face, just completely was all blood. So you've had so many great knockouts during your career, but what would you say is the best knockout that you had during your career?
Well, I would have to say two of them. One of them on a strategic level was Ryan Jensen, because me and my coach had worked on. Ryan's one of my great friends now, which he's a good friend. He ended up being a teammate, and he's a great friend. But that was the reason why that sticks out is because of the strategy side of it. Coach Winklejohn and I had noticed that off of an initial jab, he postures his head up, so we worked on the double jab overhand, and it came to fruition. It came true, and we ended up earning that knockout off of that strategy. And then, of course, there's Phil Baroni. The Phil Baroni one because it was on national television, and I respect Phil but he was the New York badass, man, and that guy talked tremendous trash, man. That was one of the first times that I ever had anybody get under my skin, and I actually wanted to knock him out, So he got under my skin, and he got to me on an emotional level, which is one of the things that I try to teach with my students. It's tactical over emotional. Emotion will always pull you into a fight that you don't want. So tactical over emotional, but he drew me into an emotional fight, and he made it almost personal, and I was in front of a lot of people. Now, it could have easily been me getting knocked out, so I totally respect fighting and fighters as a whole because of what you put on the line. I know there was tremendous time. There was amounts of time when my mom and brothers and sisters were at home jumping for joy, and then there was other times when they were saddened, by seeing me lose or get knocked out or TKO'd. So you really have to respect this game. You really have to respect your adversary, and you have to really respect everybody who does it because they put it on the line every time, and sometimes you can be the best fighter in the world, and then you can still end up a highlight reel on the opposite end, getting knocked out. So you put your pride and you put everything on the line when you step into that octagon, man, and that's why I love it so much.
You had two great win streaks. One was the 15 fight win streak where you won the King of the Cage belt and defended it 6 of the 7 times that you defended that belt. So there was that win streak, and then the win streak, like you were mentioning earlier, the one that put you on the map, the one when you were fighting for Strikeforce and Elite XC, when you were beating guys like Evangelista Cyborg and Phil Baroni and Ryan Jensen and Rinky Fudica, all these guys. What would you say is the better win streak? Obviously, you're fighting better competition in the 4-fight win streak, but that 15-fight win streak, you know this game, it's very difficult to win 15 in a row. So what would you say is the better win streak?
Well, I believe those King of the Cage fights, there was a lot of established veterans that I ended up fighting throughout that too. But when I tell my students all the time, when you're an amateur or a beginner pro, you're sifting through the fighters who are going to be there and the fighters who are going to eventually not make it. So eventually you're going to end up fighting competition that is on your level. As amateurs and beginner pros, it's still establishing itself. So when the streak, when I was fighting the better competition, is something that I take most pride in, because that's when I was fighting people who were on my level and winning and beating people who were on my level. And there were some losses there too to some of these great fighters. And but when you get to that pro level and you get to that high pro level and you're fighting tough fights consistently, named guys consistently, that is where you take most pride, because that is where the cream rises to the top, man. And you're fighting dudes that are just on your same level. So it's a little bit sweeter when you're winning and beating those guys that are at your level.
One thing I've always wanted to ask you is about the Cyborg stare down. And it was a weird stare down because he went forehead to forehead with you, and then he shoved you. So one thing I've always wanted to ask you is, what did he say to you during that whole stare down that you had at the weigh-in? Like, was it even in English?
Yeah, you know what? I knew, because he's a psychological fighter. Right. I knew that he likes to get in the heads of fighters. Mm-hmm. I knew that he was going to, at weigh-ins, try to intimidate me. Mm-hmm. And there was no way I was going to let this guy try to intimidate me. So I stood my ground, and I believe that it was the first time he ever got put in a situation where somebody just didn't back down from him. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't going to give an inch. And we went forehead to forehead, and we kind of like looked at each other like a couple of dogs. We're just like our heads were grinding, and we're looking at each other, and it looked funny, but it was super intense. It was a super intense moment. And I think he pushed me because he didn't know what to do right then. I think he got into a position where he realized he wasn't going to intimidate me, and he didn't know what else to do from that moment. So I think he, of course, on top of the emotional guy that he's known to be, super tough and respected guy, but I don't even remember what he said. I just remember that he pushed me after he had stared me down like that, and I knew that we were going to have a great fight. I knew it was going to be a good fight. The stare down is such a psychological and an intense moment. Every fight that I've been in where somebody doesn't give an inch, I knew those were going to be for the stare downs. I knew who were going to be my opponents that I was going to walk through, and I knew who the guys were going to give me a fight just off of that emotional, psychological moment right there. So he definitely was trying to intimidate. I didn't give an inch, and then when he realized that I wasn't being bothered by it, he tried to continue by trying to be intimidating, but I just shut it down. I really didn't care,
One thing I always wanted to ask you also was, did you always keep a picture of your opponent, or was that just for Cyborg and Jacare?
No, I once I got to that high level and where you were fighting guys that were tough and they were established pros, I would put pictures of them on my fridge. I wouldn't keep them on me. I kept images of them on my phone. So if I ever needed motivation, I would just look at a picture. The thing about fighting is you've never seen these people before at all. You see videos of them, you watch interviews and vice versa, but meeting them in person and especially the week of, can be somewhat intimidating and somewhat a shocker. So I would look at these images on my fridge of my opponents, and whenever I needed, I would just pull up an image of them on my phone, and I would try to just get familiar with them and their image and get familiar with them so that when fight week came, it wasn't such a shock to actually see them, you know? Mm-hmm. The psychology part of this game is overlooked, but it's huge, and it's there, you know, and that was one of the things that I did to kind of relax me, not be so intimidated or shocked whenever we first came across each other. Oh, I'm familiar with that face, mm-hmm. you know. So that you know, I did that pretty commonly from almost my midpoint on of my career. Once there was enough information and pictures and these established fighters, so that way when I met them in person, it wasn't such a shocker.
Who's the best guy you ever fought?
Let me see. I probably one of the toughest guys I ever fought was Jacare Souza. Mm-hmm. He was a monster. He was a beast. He was huge. He was tough. But we went the distance, and I earned my respect mm-hmm. with him. But he was definitely one of the toughest guys that I have ever competed against.
When you were in Strikeforce, there were so many great middleweights, and unfortunately you didn't get to fight all these guys, but there were a lot of fights that I wanted to see you in. I wanted to see you fight against Kung Lee. I wanted to see you fight against Scott Smith. I wanted to see you fight against Benji Radich. I wanted to see that Robbie Lawler rematch. I wanted to see you fight Matt Lindland, all these guys who were in Strikeforce at that time, but unfortunately none of these fights ever took place. So is there a fighter out there that you never got a chance to fight? I mean, obviously you had fights that fell through. Che Mills, that fight comes to mind, and obviously Drew McFedry's, that fight comes to mind. Whether you were scheduled to fight them or just, you know, a fantasy matchup, is there a fighter out there that you never got a chance to fight that you would have liked to?
You know, all those guys that you mentioned, Kung Lee and Scott Smith were two of them. Scott Smith, I really like Scott, man. We fought in the same circuit for a while, and he was a good dude. He was a powerhouse striker, man, and he was a guy that I was hoping that me and him can mix it up, you know. Another one was Kung Lee. I always wanted the opportunity to fight Kung Lee. And then another one that comes to mind was Shamrock. I wanted to fight Shamrock. He himself was a middleweight and was mixing it up too. So those are three fights that I was really hoping that would develop and happen for me. And they just didn't. They didn't happen. But those are some of the guys that I was hoping to mix it up with.
You fought a lot of heavy hitters, and there's one fight that you had back in IFC where I'm pretty sure you didn't wear a mouthpiece, and I never saw them put it in, and I never saw you take it out. So, do you still have all your teeth? Yeah, man, I remember that. I remember it's so funny. That's how novice and beginner we were, man. They just let the fighters just get in there, man. Right. You could have Vaseline on, or they didn't check your mouthpiece. So I still have all my teeth, and I remember that, man. That's so crazy. I forget who the fight was, but I remember at the end of it, I was like, shit, man, I don't even have my mouthpiece in. You know? Yeah. I think it was Al Moling. I think it was.
Al Moling, yeah. I ended up KOing that guy, and I think it was in the first round, or submitting him, something like that. He was a big, powerful looking human being, and I ended up, that's when looks can be deceiving. He looked like a powerhouse, man, and I was able to dominate that fight.
For a long time, you were always known for having this very unique hairstyle where you had like a buzz cut, but then you had two pieces of hair in front. What do you call that, do?
That was Fernando Vargas was a Latino fighter back in the day, and he had a similar haircut. That's real. That's kind of like a bang. They're kind of like bangs, you know. Latinos back in the day, they'd have rat tails, or they'd have bangs and then shaved heads. So it was kind of like my version of that for the Latinos supporters, and a lot of people called them devil horns, right? But to me, it was just kind of just a different way of representing the Latino/Mexican culture.
Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, but didn't they used to be blonde at one point in time?
Yeah. At one point, I had them dyed blonde. Back in the day when bleaching your hair was cool, you know. So I had that for a few fights, and then eventually I went back to normal color, and then I believe after the Cyborg fight is when I grew up and cut them off.
What do you call the hairstyle you have now? Because you have more hair than I've ever seen you with. What is this called? The retired fighter?
Yeah. Now I actually have hair, and it's crazy. I have an undercut, and I have my top hair, and you know, I have hair, man. You know, at 41 years old, I still have my hair, man. I'm very proud of it.
Yeah, you look great. You never aged. You look the same that you did when you were fighting in Elite XC. 10 years ago, you look the exact same. Did you find the fountain of youth and you're not telling us about it?
Yeah, you know, I think, you know what's very funny is, I still, a lot of people still, like, when people find out I'm 41, they're like, no, they just can't believe it, you know. I still look the same, so maybe I am a vampire, and I just don't know it, you know. Sometimes I tell people that MMA, you know, is the fountain of youth, man. MMA can be the fountain of youth, or it can make you look old really fast, one of the two.
I saw recently that you had no beard for the first time. I had never seen you without a beard, and you could go right now, rob a bank with a beard, and then come back and shave it off and no one would ever find you. Like, you look completely different without the beard. Not that I'm saying, you know, go rob a bank. I don't want the FBI on my neck, but you know what I mean. No, you look completely different. I didn't even know that was you.
When I was going out for the police department and fire department and going to school, I trimmed up. I was having interviews, and I had to be clean shaven, so I shaved all my facial hair, and wow, I looked crazy to myself, you know, but there's a point in every fighter's career where they're going to realize that fighting will be over with, and all the money that you have saved throughout fighting will eventually be gone. So there's going to have to, and I try to stress this with a lot of my students, and that is having a life after fighting. And I'm very appreciative of the coaches that I had. Greg Jackson and Coach Winklejohn always talked about fighting after life. Life after fighting. So I was very pleased to have those kind of guys instruct me as friends and coaches, you know, and prepare me for life after fighting.
Smokin' Joe, the Mexican Hitman, the Dream Smasher. How many nicknames do you have?
You know, they were all given to me, so, you know, I'm pretty sure there's even a few more out there, but I really appreciated Smokin' Joe, you know. Of course, there's a legend that comes with that, you know, Smokin' Joe Frazier. All respect to that man, and I was never on that kind of level, but these are nicknames that were produced and given to me by other people, so, you know, I appreciate and respect all of them, you know, but I'm sure there's a few more out there.
Originally, you were born in L.A., and then in the 80s you moved to New Mexico, Farmington, New Mexico, and now in Albuquerque. But why are you a Redskins fan?
Well, as a kid growing up in Los Angeles, you were either a Raiders fan or you were a Rams fan. Those were pushed on you. But I remember when I was a kid, probably in the second or third grade, I remember watching a Washington Redskins Dallas Cowboys game, And I remember that the Redskins, back in the day when Joe Theismann was playing, they had the offensive line called the Hogs. And to a child, that was very appealing. There's these big men, the Hogettes, they're wearing these dresses and they had pig noses on, and they were kind of clowny and fun, and they had the posse, Art Monk and Gary Clark, Ricky Sanders, the wideouts, and they just really, for a young kid, they were fun. And John Riggins, the Diesel, and Joe Theismann, and they were really appealing to me, So as a kid, I chose my own football team, and it was the Washington Redskins. And since I believe it was 94 or 92, the last time we won a Super Bowl, I've been suffering ever since.
Do you have a favorite player from the Redskins?
Let me see here. I want to, right now, Ryan Kerrigan, he's a linebacker for us. Right now, he's my favorite player on the Redskins team. As far as talent goes overall, Odell Beckham's a freak of nature. He kind of can be a baby sometimes, but he's a freak of nature. I really, really want to believe in Kirk Cousins, our quarterback, and he shows some major strides, and I really like his approach to the game. He's a non-showboater, kind of real quiet performer. He doesn't need a lot of attention, and I really appreciate and respect that about him. But I really want Kirk Cousins to be successful, because we need a general, man. We need somebody to run the team. All-time Redskins, John Riggins, and Darryl Green, cornerback, Washington Redskins, Hall of Famer, Pro Bowler, so many times. I love Darryl Green, man, a class act, a good person, a good human being. John Riggins for his showness and his toughness, and those two guys stick out the best for me.
Darryl Green always kept a Tootsie Roll in his sock. Makes you run fast. Remember that.
Yes, sir.
Favorite food?
Oh, my favorite food has to be, this is going to be typical, but I love a good pizza. Oh, man, I love a good pizza. Pizza and ice cream.
Favorite TV show, and it can be a show currently on the air or a show no longer on the air, just overall favorite TV show.
Let me see here. That one's tough, man. I'm gonna have to go with favorite TV show of all time, and part of it's because I'm a New Mexican now. What was astounding was Breaking Bad, and what a great series.
Favorite band and or solo artist?
This is gonna be. Let me see here. That's a tough one. Favorite band of all time. My favorite band of all time, and this is really going to catch people off guard, but it has to be Marilyn Manson. Have to be Marilyn Manson. I was a dark little gothy kid, and they helped me. They helped me out through some tremendous times, man. Marilyn Manson, Korn, Pantera. Pantera was one of my first loves, man. Pantera, Korn, 9 Inch Nails. I think 9 Inch Nails comes in a close second.
Celebrity people say you look like?
I've had a few people see me and say that I look like Colin Kaepernick, except I'm not 6'4", right? And I've had a couple of people say that I look like Colin Kaepernick, and that's about it.
For some reason, and I hope you're not offended, but for some reason, I think you and Cub Swanson look a little bit alike now that he has more hair.
Yeah, no offense to that, man. Okay. Cub's a nice-looking dude, man. So, hey, thanks.
For some reason, maybe it's the Greg Jackson connection. I don't know what it is, but for some reason, I think you guys look alike. I don't know why.
Yes, sir, man.
Go-to song when you're singing in the shower.
Go-to song in the shower. Oh, my gosh.
see here. You know, I don't have one, man. I just don't sing. It's whatever I just currently got done listening to.
Okay.
It could be a commercial. It could be the last jingle that I heard will be what's being talked about in the shower, I guess.
Okay. Okay. Besides fighting, what are you passionate about?
Besides fighting, I'm passionate about helping people. I really enjoy helping people. I enjoy raising people's spirits up. I also there was a time there where I was huge into small arms and shooting, and I love shooting. I love outdoors things. I love fly fishing. Fly fishing is one of those things I've been doing as long as I've been fighting. So I love fly fishing. I love sports, and I love helping people out.
What jobs did you work before becoming a full-time fighter?
Growing up in Farmington, New Mexico, there's a lot of natural gas. So I was working out in the oil fields, and I used to do textile services, which was a delivery man, but I worked a lot of oil field types of jobs. There's so many blue collar jobs out there that you can do. So that was one of them.
Are you married, engaged, in a relationship, or single and ready to mingle?
I'm in a relationship now with a beautiful, caring woman, and she's amazing. She's a charge nurse. She works with. She's got a big heart. She works with preemies. She works in the NICU. She works with premature babies. She's a real life hero, man. She's a real life hero, and she saves people, and she's saving me.
I know you're really good friends with Kyle Noak, and you're very close to a lot of the other guys at Jackson's, but who are some of your close friends from MMA, and who are some of the guys that you hang out with outside of the sport?
Let me see. Yeah, Kyle Noak is my best friend. Let me see here. Jody Escabel, I've known her since she was 14 years old. She's now 30. John Dodson. These are people that I've been around for the most, right? So I'm mentoring a kid now. He just turned 19. His name is Nick Chavez, and he's probably the one person I spend most of my time with. He's somebody who really reminds me of myself. He's a young, up and coming fighter. He's had a hard upbringing. School is very difficult for him. So I keep him really close to me. He's somebody I share a lot of things with, and I kind of mentor along the way. Kind of like a big brother. I feel like I'm in the Big Brother program, except that I'm doing it with him. So I have a lot of friends throughout MMA, but I'd have to say that Nick Chavez and my girlfriend and my girlfriend's kids are who I spend most of my time with.
Do you have any pre-fight rituals or superstitions?
I wasn't. I didn't have any superstitions at all, man. The fight was going to happen the way it was. I'm not one into superstitions at all, but pre-fight ritual, looking in the mirror before I went out, looking in the mirror before I went to an event, and looking, just don't even have to say anything, just looking at myself in the mirror and zoning in, man, just zoning in. There was just something about looking at my reflection that got me fired up. And then, of course, listening to some hardcore rock and roll before I went out.
Do you have any post-fight rituals?
Post-fight was full of every fight. I had to call Mom. So that was my post-fight, is call Mom, let her know that I was okay, let her know that I loved her,
You finished your MMA career fighting at welterweight. Why did you decide to change weight classes and go down there? Was it because you were coming off of 3 losses and you were trying to get something started at a new weight class, or was that because you probably should have been fighting there for a very long time and you just decided to break down and then go there? Why did you finish your career at 170?
I believe that trying to find an adjustment could be a part of it, but the sport was evolving. When my buddy Brian Stan was able to drop down to 85,
okay,
I was like, you know what, man, maybe 70, because those are some big men. When Keith Jardine, Brian Stan, Jacare Souza, these are some beastly men, bro. You know, like, so I was like, you know what, you have to try it, bro. You have to try it. So I committed to the diet, and I committed to it, and it worked, and I felt really good at that weight. I just did it just a little too late, you know. I enjoyed 170 just a little too late, but it took a lot of effort, work, and a higher level of dedication, but I'm glad that I got to experience it.
What's the best thing that ever happened to you?
The best thing that has ever happened to me would probably be 2 things, right? The birth of my nieces and nephews. I love my nieces and nephews, and they give me so much joy. And then I would have to say the second best thing is right now, currently, the relationship I'm in right now with my girlfriend. Meeting her, she has helped me grow in so many ways that I couldn't think possible. When the thing about relationships is it can be super difficult. Of course, everybody knows that, but she is so different from me that I've had to learn to grow as a person, to be able to understand her way of thinking, to understand, the things that she loves and passionate about, and then of course communicating. It's always easy to find somebody who's like-minded and somebody who's just like you. It's really easy, but there's no growth there. This woman has, I've grown tremendously as a man just by being with her. So, if our relationship was to end, let's say tomorrow, I still would have learned so much from this relationship. So I'm very thankful for her and appreciative of her. And she is, right now, one of the best things that's ever happened to me right now in my life.
What's the worst thing that ever happened to you?
Let me see. The worst thing that has ever happened probably would be, let me see. I think there's a lot of things, you know. I think one of them would be I grew up in poverty, but I grew up in poverty, and I saw a very abusive person. I had a very abusive person in my life. He was an abusive man mentally and physically, and I had to endure some mental and physical abuse as a young person, but I wouldn't change it because it definitely helped curve and make me the man that I am today. I feel like I'm a loving stepfather, a caring individual. I've had 3 different relationships in my life where I've had 5 different stepchildren in my life, all which I currently still communicate with and love, and I feel like I'm a great father figure / stepfather. So, having experienced those things have helped make me a better person overall.
Some people are afraid of spiders, some people are afraid of heights, some people are afraid of the dark. What are you afraid of?
I'm afraid of heights, man. I didn't realize how afraid of heights I was until I believe it was the stratosphere. I got on top of the stratosphere, and I remember looking over the edge, and it felt like it was pulling me over. It feels like you lose your balance. I was feeling like, I had to jump to the center of the building. I had to jump towards the middle because I felt like I was losing my balance. And then there's these stupid roller coasters on top of that thing, and I remember on both times the merry-go-round one that hangs you over the strip, and it spins, and I remember just thinking, I'm going to die right here. I remember I was with one of my buddy's girlfriends, and I remember I thought I was going to die, and then there's another one where the coaster where it like tilts you over the edge, and it feels like you're going to go over, so I really realized just how scared of heights I was.
Person you look up to the most?
It's easy, man. That's my mother. My mother has endured a ton. She's the youngest of 11, and my mother is my rock and my hero. My mom is super pivotal and important in my life, and it's my mother.
What's your pet peeve?
Pet peeve? My pet peeve is what is it? Conceited people. People who take selfies, who have to post a damn selfie every day on social media. What's crazy about it is dudes do it. Yeah. I can understand women, but guys post selfies every day now. I'd have to say that social media is probably one of my pet peeves. It really shows a lot of people's true nature, man, and there's a lot of people who really, I don't know, man, I'm just an old schooler, I guess. Social media just can really drive me crazy sometimes.
Time period you'd like to go back and visit, and why?
80s, man. I love the 80s. The music and the styles, man. The music and the style. I like retro. I like 80s. I like neon colors. I love the 80s, man. Retro for sure.
If you could stay one age forever, how old would you stay, and why?
I would probably stay 28. 28 forever. You know, I believe that's about the time where I started really getting a good grasp on life overall. You know, love, money, work, kind of the environment, the world. I just started looking at things a lot different when I turned 28. It was more of an awakening period, more of a kind of like a balanced adult period. Man, that looks pretty good. So 28.
If you could trade places with anyone in the world for a week, who would you trade places with, and why?
I think a lot of people would, you know, like, I would have to say the director of the CIA, something like that, because there's a lot of questions that I would love to have answered, man. I think that a lot of things that we believe there's not an answer to, like who killed JFK, I believe there's an answer for that. And I want to know these things, man. I want to know. I love the idea of conspiracy theories, and I would love to get a lot of conspiracies answered. So, the director of the CIA.
What do you worry about? What's something that keeps you up at night?
I think everybody worries about their future. Everybody worries about what kind of legacy they leave behind. 41 years old, you know, it could be halfway through life, you know, when you think about it in that way. What kind of legacy am I going to leave behind? Am I going to leave this person known, having accomplished all the things I've wanted to accomplish? So, it's your future, man. It's your legacy. But I think people should be concerned with what kind of human being they were. Were they a productive human being? Did they live life? Did they, experience things that not everybody experiences? You know, so I think it's that, man.
Number one thing on your bucket list.
Oh, number one thing on my bucket list, I think it's taking a vacation with my girlfriend, man. Right now, I've been so busy and working so hard. I would love to just get away for a week and just be on the beach somewhere with my girlfriend and just, buy her things that she wants, spend some time on the beach and really, really cater to her and give her what she deserves. You know, right now I'm in a transitional point in my life where trying to find that career along with coaching. I'm super busy. I work 6 days a week, so she has to endure that. So she's enduring it with me, and I'm hoping that it all pays off and that I can give her all those things.
You gave us so many great moments. You gave us so many great knockouts. You fought a lot of great guys. You beat a lot of great guys. You fought for titles. You were champion. But as time goes on, and obviously we know what you accomplished because we lived it, but as time goes on and more new fans come into the sport and they start to forget about some of those shows that you fought in, does it bother you that you never fought in the UFC? Because obviously it's a UFC world right now and we're all living in it. So does it bother you that you never fought in the octagon?
You know, it's something that I wish would have happened, and if I would have stayed with Strikeforce, it would have happened. But it's not something that I base everything on. There were moments there when I was a free agent, and Strikeforce decided to pay me more money than the UFC was going to pay me. So I stood with them. I was never one about boasting or who's the most popular. I was always about where's the best income going to be and where can I strive the most. You know, there was a moment there where I could have went to the UFC, but Strikeforce was just paying a little bit more money. So it's not like I never had opportunities. It's just that I chose the opposite route. If I was arrogant and if I really wanted to, if I cared about the opinions of others, yeah, I could have went to the UFC for to say that I did it, but I didn't, and that's because I really don't care about the opinions of others. The opinions I care about are the ones that I love and the people that care about me and who I care for. We live in a culture and a society now where everybody feels like they have an opinion and they can post it on social media and they can be hurtful to others, and a lot of people really care about what other people say about them. I don't. You know, in order to be a fighter, you have to have kind of a, you have to be callous to some of these things, and I don't care. I never cared about what other people thought or what their opinions are of me. The only people's opinions matter are those of my loved ones.
What's your hidden talent?
Hidden talent. A couple of them. I can fly fish with the best of them. I can do some tremendous card tricks. Well, I'm kind of rusty at them, but card tricks, and man, I can game. I can play some video games.
If you could change one thing about the world, what would you change and why?
I think that I would change the media. The media is so fear-driven, and it lies. The media is not what it used to be to us. The news is not what it used to be. I wish there was more truth in our media. I think that we live in this culture where media and social media and media, period, dominates. I think that it also can hurt us. I think that the media can really be deceiving and create deception and really get people to really believe. We're in a society now where people truly believe what they see on the TV, and it's very frightening. If people just took the time to research on their own, they're going to find more truth. I think that we live in a society now where media really controls consumption, direction, war, health. I think that the media is something that should be addressed, but it's never going to happen, you know. But if it was up to me, that would be the one thing that I would change in our society.
Last question, Joey. What do you consider the best moment of your fighting career?
The best moment in my fighting career is going to have to be, and a lot of people would boast about this knockout or that knockout,
But my greatest moment happened when I went to the decision with Jacare Souza. I knew that was going to be the toughest adversary that I had ever fought. I don't believe I think at that time he had, 5 straight finishes. People were picking me to lose in the first round by submission to him. I did weather a storm there. I remember looking up at him in the third round, and he had a bloody nose, and it was the first time that he had been battered a little bit. And I smiled at him because I knew what I was facing as an adversary, and my greatest moment wasn't through triumph. My greatest moment was through defeat, but it was facing that fear. It was accepting that fight. And I knew what kind of opponent I was facing, and I earned the respect of that man, and that is my greatest moment throughout my whole career. It's not a glorious, shiny moment. It's a moment where I faced my toughest adversary, and I went to a decision loss, but that was the fight that I was most proud of. That was the one that took the most preparation, and I knew what we were up against, and to me, going that decision, although I would have loved to have won, there were moments there where I came so close to landing that big shot, and that was what the fight was all about, was opportunities, what I did with those opportunities. There were opportunities to win. It didn't develop, but having to face somebody like that and go the distance, that was my greatest moment in 39 MMA fights.
Joey, have a safe and happy holiday season. Thank you for taking the time to talk. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, sir. I